The struggle of freedom against tyranny is the struggle of memory against forgetting. These were the words of the great Czech writer Milan Kundera. Today, we join that struggle in choosing the side of freedom of memory against tyranny and forgetting. We remember that a great darkness spread across the world in 1917 with the Bolshevik Communist Revolution, which enslaved the people of Ukraine, Russia, and much of Eastern Europe. An evil from which emanated a philosophy that was anti-human, that sought to subjugate human dignity to an all-powerful state. A philosophy which was expressed in a century of terrible crimes. In 1994, Stéphane Courtois and a collection of leading historians assembled a series of essays based on the post-Soviet archives in a seminal work entitled Le Livre Noir du Communisme, the Black Book of Communism, in which they detailed the deliberate political murder, the deaths of some 100 million people under communist regimes from 1917 until the present. From Lenin's famine of 1921 to the Holodomor, which we remember today, to the famine of 1946, to the millions buried in unmarked graves in Stalin's gulag, to the pogroms, to the murder of young Poles at Katyn, to the invasions of Hungary and Czech Republic, to the killing fields of Cambodia, to the tens of millions murdered by Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward in another communist planned famine, to the concentration camps of North Korea today, to the jails of Fidel Castro in Cuba. Over the last century, 100 million lives taken by this ideology that seeks to oppress human dignity and eliminate freedom. That is why commemorations like today's are so important. Elie Wiesel, the great chronicler of the Holocaust, wrote that remembering is a noble and necessary act. The call of memory, the call to memory, he said, reaches us from the very dawn of history. No commandment figures so frequently or so insistently in the Bible as the duty of zachor, the Hebrew word of remembrance. It is incumbent upon us to remember the good we have received and the evil we have suffered, unquote. Thank you to the Ukrainian community for discharging that biblical mandate of zachor, of remembrance, a sacred duty. Thank you for not letting us forget the crimes of the communist Soviet regime. Wiesel also wrote that to forget the dead would be akin to killing them a second time. And that is exactly what the communists sought to do in suppressing the memory of Holodomor, of making it a crime to write or talk about this great crime against human life. And we must remember that there were sophisticated Western, supposedly progressive voices who were complicit in this, one of history's great cover-ups. None less than the bureau chief of the New York Times in the Soviet Union in 1932 and 33, Walter Duranty, who subsequently received the Pulitzer Prize, which still sits proudly at the headquarters of the New York Times, conspired with some other Western journalists to write that in 1932 and 33 there was a time of agricultural plenty and that there was no starvation in Ukraine or elsewhere in the Soviet Union. These were the useful idiots of whom Lenin wrote. Westerners who purposefully lied to the rest of the world about one of the great acts of mass murder in human history. And so as we call to memory the souls of those whose lives were taken, let us at the same time hold to account, hold us responsible, those not only in the communist regime, but in those in the democratic West who played a role in covering up this terrible crime against history. That is why it is important for democracies like Canada's to acknowledge the genocidal nature of Holodomor. It's why I was proud on behalf of the Government of Canada to announce that Canada's government would be the first in the West to recognize the genocidal nature of the Holodomor planned famine genocide of 1932, when the Parliament of Canada voted in favor of a law doing so in 2008. Thank you especially to the Ukrainian Canadian community for being a memory for Ukraine when Ukrainians could not freely do so themselves in their native country. Ukrainians in Canada understood that they had a responsibility to fully live their Ukrainian culture, language, faith, traditions, to be a memory and a voice for freedom where Ukrainians in Ukraine could not. And so, thank you, Tatiana, for your stirring and tragic words which recall for us the aspects of Holodomor which are impossible for the human mind fully to grasp. St. John Paul II wrote about this when he referred to the mysterium iniquitatis, the mystery of evil. And so today, as we call to prayerful memory the souls of those whose lives were so brutally taken by that communist regime, we acknowledge that what occurred in those days was truly the mystery of evil. And so for the memory of those whose lives were taken, Vishnaya Pamyat, memory eternal.